Oriana, stop pretending this company has anything to do with you. You walk these halls because you married into the right name. He said it with the microphone still warm from his father's speech. In the grand lobby of the Meridian Kessler, the 22nd hotel in the Kessler and Tide chain, while 200 guests stood beneath chandeliers that Oriana's mother had chosen by hand from a Viennese catalogue she kept in a cedar chest in her study. Oriana Kessler-Vane, 34, the wife of Caden Vane and the hidden controlling owner of Kessler and Tide hotels through the Kessler Ridge Trust, stood near the east archway in a simple ivory dress. She did not move. She did not answer. In Caden's hand was the bronze compass. The same compass that had been inside her coat pocket 2 hours earlier. The same compass her mother, Mara Kessler, had carried on every hotel opening night since the first Kessler and Tide property opened 31 years ago. The same compass engraved on the back with the words True North, MK. The initials of the woman who had built a $900 million hospitality empire from one converted inn in Western Virginia and a loan no bank had been willing to fully extend. Beside Caden stood Fleur Ansel, 35, the polished owner of Ansel & Co., interior design and Caden's private mistress. She wore a champagne gown and a smile that had been rehearsed for exactly this moment. At the head table sat Rutger Vane, 63, Caden's father and the executive director of operations for Kessler and Tide Hotels, a man who had held that title for 11 years, who signed off on every seasonal vendor contract, who walked the back-of-house corridors like he had laid the foundations himself. He watched with the flat expression of a man who approved. He had no idea that the daughter-in-law he had dismissed at every family dinner for 6 years was the controlling beneficiary of the Kessler Ridge Trust, the legal structure that owned him, his bonuses, his title, and his office. Then Caden looked at Oriana across the lobby floor and said, "This belongs with someone who understands the future I'm building." And he placed the compass into Fleur's open hand. Earlier that morning, the fog had not yet lifted off the Shenandoah Valley when Oriana arrived at the hotel's service entrance. She had not come through the main doors. She never did on days like this. She wore a grey wool coat and carried white chrysanthemums, the same flowers her mother had always brought on the morning before an opening. Paz Merritt, 26, a junior concierge who had been with Kessler and Tide for 8 months, was doing his pre-opening walk of the lobby when he saw her come in through the side hall. He almost said good morning and then stopped because something about the way she moved, steady, unhurried, like the building already knew her, made the greeting feel wrong. Near the east corridor, Huxley Dawn, 61, a senior housekeeping supervisor who had worked for Kessler and Tide since Mara Kessler's second property, was polishing a brass fixture near the staff memorial wall. The wall was small, set into an alcove most guests never noticed. 8 names on a plaque. A junior chef lost in a kitchen fire. A maintenance worker who collapsed during a summer heat wave. A front desk manager killed in a car accident on her way home from a closing shift. Mara Kessler had installed the first plaque herself. Every year, on the morning before a new property opened, the Kessler and Tide tradition was to observe a quiet minute of remembrance. Rutger Vane had cancelled the tradition 3 years ago. He called it inefficient. Oriana had kept it going privately, without announcement. Huxley saw her come around the corner with the chrysanthemums, and his hand went still on the brass. He looked at her the way old employees sometimes look at the children of founders, the way that carries more history than a greeting can hold. He lowered his chin slightly and said, almost under his breath, "Miss Kessler." Oriana placed the flowers beneath the plaque and stood there for a moment without speaking. She had kept 2 lives for 6 years. Publicly, she was Oriana Vane, the quiet wife of an ambitious man who held a hospitality consulting contract through Kessler and Tide's client development program, a contract arranged through his father's connections, not his own merits. Privately, she was Oriana Mara Kessler, the only daughter of the founder, the controlling beneficiary of the Kessler Ridge Trust, the woman whose signature was required before any structural change to the company could be made permanent. The board knew. The attorneys knew. Vance Ellery, 51, Kessler and Tide's internal audit director, and one of the handful of officers still loyal to Mara Kessler's governance structure, knew. A few senior managers who had been with the company long enough to remember the founder's daughter at ribbon cuttings knew. Caden did not know, Rutger did not know, and Oriana had kept it that way deliberately for a reason she had once believed was love. She had wanted to know whether Caden Vane, with his confident walk and his father's connections and his certainty that the world was about to give him everything he deserved, she had wanted to know whether that man would have chosen her without the trust, without the hotel, without the $900 million weight of her bloodline. She had her answer by year 3. She had simply not been ready to use it. Vance appeared beside her near the memorial wall. He kept his voice low. The numbers are worse. Ansel & Co. received preferred vendor placement on 4 Kessler & Tudd renovation contracts in the last 8 months. No competitive bid process. Pruitt-Culm authorized 2 of them directly from Rutger's operational division. Pruitt-Culm, 44, was Kessler & Tide's finance manager, a man who had arrived through Rutger's recommendation and whose loyalties had never been difficult to read. How are they coded? Oriana asked. Client Relations Development. 2 were labeled renovation consultation credits. He paused. Oswin Ansel submitted the final 2 requests personally. Oswin Ansel, 39, was Fleur's older brother and co-owner of Ansel & Co. The firm had been bleeding money for 2 years. It needed a flagship client, or a backdoor into one. Oriana's expression did not change. Is there documentation? Enough to take to the full board. She looked at the flowers beneath the memorial plaque. She thought of her mother, who had once told her that the worst thing a hotel owner could do was confuse hospitality with vulnerability. Then prepare it, she said. Her phone buzzed. A message from San Burrell, 47, her private attorney and legal counsel for the Kessler Ridge Trust. Board authority packet is ready. Emergency notice can be issued tonight if needed. Say the word. Oriana locked the screen before Paz rounded the corner. He saw her face and stopped. She had looked, for just a moment, like someone who had made a decision that had been a long time coming. Good morning, Mrs. Vane, he said carefully. She looked at him. Good morning. Walk the east hallway before tonight. Make sure the lighting is right over the founder's portrait. Paz nodded, confused, because the founder's portrait had not yet been unveiled. It was still covered behind a canvas cloth in the heritage alcove, waiting for the closing ceremony of the gala. Of course, he said. Oriana walked toward the service corridor, and Huxley watched her go. He had worked for Mara Kessler for 9 years before the founder died. He recognized the way Oriana moved through a property she owned, unhurried, attentive, like someone who had learned long ago that power does not need to announce itself. By 8 o'clock that evening, the Meridian Kessler was lit from within. The lobby chandelier threw warm light over 200 guests in evening clothes. Hotel staff moved quietly between them with trays. A string quartet played near the east archway. The Kessler & Tide crest, a compass rose above a ridgeline, was printed on every surface. The bronze compass had been in Oriana's coat pocket all evening. She had removed her coat near the heritage alcove to help 2 employees straighten the canvas covering her mother's portrait. When she turned back for her coat, Caden was already holding it. Let me take this, he had said, in the flat voice he used when he thought he was being helpful. You always set things down and lose them. She had let him take it. She had not thought about the compass in the pocket. She had been focused on the portrait, on her mother's face, still hidden behind the cloth, on the fact that her mother's name was not yet on the wall, but Rutger Vane's name was on every operational report in the building. She had gone toward the heritage alcove for a moment alone. That was when she heard Caden's voice through the side corridor. Then Fleur's. She stopped. Fleur, you keep making promises. Caden, after tonight everyone will know where I stand. My father is introducing me as the future of Kessler & Tide operations. It's done. A pause. Fleur, and Oriana. Caden, she'll understand her place by morning. Oriana stood in the corridor and did not move. She heard the silence that followed, the kind of silence that exists between 2 people who have had this conversation many times before and no longer need the whole sentence. She walked back toward the lobby. She checked her clutch. The compass was not there. When she reached the lobby, the program had already begun. Rutger was at the microphone, speaking about legacy, about operational excellence, about the Vale family's contribution to Kessler & Tide's growth. Every word landed wrong in the room, though no one said so. He spoke as if he had built the ridge, as if the compass rose in the crest belonged to the man who managed the schedule, not the woman who drew the map. Then Caden stepped up without being called. Rutger smiled. Tora Vane, 29, Caden's younger sister and Oriana's least favorite person in any room, leaned toward the woman beside her and said something behind her champagne glass. The woman was Beck Solon, 37, Fleur's image consultant and closest social ally, who held her phone just below table height, angled upward. Oriana watched the phone. She had seen Bex do this before, always recording just enough to have options later. Caden took the microphone. He spoke about ambition, about surrounding yourself with people who matched your vision. He looked directly at Oriana. For years, I built a future alongside someone who preferred the background, who was comfortable staying small. His voice was even, rehearsed. I used to believe that kind of loyalty was enough, but a man with real vision needs to stand beside people who recognize what he's capable of. The room shifted. Caden reached into his jacket pocket. Oriana recognized the shape before she saw it clearly. The compass. He had taken it from her coat. He had planned this. Her breath stopped. This compass belonged to the woman who started this company, Caden said. And tonight, I'm giving it to the woman who understands where it's going. He walked down from the stage toward Fleur. Oriana moved forward without thinking. Caden, that belongs to my mother. He looked at her. Something crossed his face, not guilt, irritation. Your mother, he said, still half smiling, would have wanted it to mean something. He placed the compass into Fleur's open palm. Fleur closed her fingers around it. She smiled with the careful warmth of someone who had practiced receiving things that weren't hers. The room was completely silent. Rutger did not move. Tora's smile widened. Pruitt stared at the floor. Oswin watched from across the room, and his expression was not pride. It was the rapid, calculating look of a man who had just recognized that something in the room had the wrong weight. Oriana did not scream. She did not reach for the compass. She did not give them the scene they had arranged the entire evening to create. She looked at Caden and said quietly, You never knew who was holding this place together. Then she turned and walked out. The night air outside the Meridian Kessler was cold. Oriana got into the back seat of her car and shut the door. For 60 seconds, she let herself be exactly as broken as the evening had earned. She pressed her hand over her mouth, and the sound that came out of her was small and jagged and private. She cried for the woman she had been on her wedding day, when she had believed that choosing Caden meant choosing someone who would grow into his own strength. She cried for every family dinner where she had absorbed the Vane family's condescension and told herself she was being patient. She cried for the compass, for what it had meant to her mother, for the fact that Caden had held it in his hand and seen only a prop. Then 60 seconds ended. She picked up her phone and called Sanne. Sanny Burrell answered on the first ring. I need the board convened, Oriana said. Tomorrow morning. 7 o'clock. The materials are already prepared. I only need your authorization. You have it, to pause. And Sanne, the compass was removed from my personal property tonight and transferred to a third party in a public setting inside company premises. Document it. That's a property recovery matter. I'll add it to the filing. Oriana ended the call. She directed the driver to Kessler and Tide's original property, the converted inn in the valley that her mother had opened 31 years ago, which still housed the company's founding archive in its lower level. Rosette Hain, 68, the woman who had been the Kessler family's housekeeper for 22 years and who had stayed near Oriana through every difficulty since Mara's death, was waiting near the archive entrance with an old brass key. She had not been called. She had simply known. She looked at Oriana's face. She looked at her empty hands. She did not ask about the compass. Come inside, she said. The archive smelled of cedar and old paper, and the particular quiet of a place that has absorbed decades of decisions. Rosette unlocked a cedar cabinet in the corner. Inside were the original deed to the first Kessler and Tide property, a photograph of Mara Kessler holding the compass on the morning of her first opening, the early trust documents, and a sealed letter. The envelope was addressed in her mother's handwriting. For the day you stop protecting the wrong people. Oriana opened it. Her mother's words were exact and without softness. Do not mistake mercy for obligation. You protected them because it was kind. Stop when it becomes costly to the people who depend on this company. She read it twice. Vance came in 20 minutes later with audit folders. Sanny arrived with the board packet. Aldwin Reese, 58, the Kessler Ridge Trust's board secretary, came last. An older man who had served her mother before serving the trust, and who had spent 6 years watching Oriana absorb the Vane family's assumptions without correcting them. They worked through the night. The lobby screens changed at 6:58 the next morning. 1 second they displayed welcome images for the Meridian Kessler's opening weekend. The next second the screens went dark, then white text appeared. Emergency board session. Controlling shareholder present. The corporate headquarters lobby went completely still. Caden arrived at 7:03, expecting, based on a message he had sent Tora the night before, that Oriana would need the morning to recover. He had worn his good watch. He was already shaping the story. A marriage that had run its course, a man who had made a practical choice, a future that belonged to the name he was going to build. Beside him, Fleur wore dark glasses and a dark coat. The compass hung from a thin chain around her neck. Rutger walked in from the parking structure, looking irritated, already preparing to manage the optics. Tora came through the revolving doors and immediately said, "Where is she?" The question was meant to sound bored. It did not land that way. The private elevator at the far end of the lobby opened. Sani stepped out first, carrying a legal case. Vance followed with 3 grey audit folders. Aldwin came next with the board packet. Then Oriana stepped out. She was not wearing ivory. She wore a sharp, dark blazer, and her hair was pulled back, and her face carried the kind of calm that comes after 60 seconds of crying in a private car and several hours of making irreversible decisions. On the lapel of her jacket was a small pin, a brass compass rose, the original Kessler and Tide crest from 30 years ago. Not the updated version Rutger had approved, the original, the one her mother had designed. Huxley Dawn was standing near the reception desk. He saw the pin before he saw her face. Then he stood up straighter, the way a person stands when something they had been quietly waiting for a long time has finally arrived. One of the younger supervisors looked at Huxley, then at Oriana, trying to understand the shift in the room. Paz Merritt stopped moving. Then Huxley took a small step forward, not toward her, just forward, the way people stand when they are making a choice without words. 2 board members who had been waiting near the elevators rose from their chairs. Caden stepped into the center of the lobby. "Oriana," he tried to sound patient. "What is this?" Sani said, without looking at him, "Mrs. Kessler has an appointment in the boardroom." Caden blinked. He caught the name. "Her name is Vane." Sani looked at him then, with the clean, practiced stillness of someone who has been waiting to say the next sentence for a very long time. "You are correct," she said. "Mrs. Vane is not here in any official capacity." She turned slightly. "Mrs. Kessler is." The lobby went completely still. Rutger's face changed first, slowly, in pieces, the way a calculation runs when the variables have been wrong from the beginning. He had attended the trust proceedings as a company officer years ago. He had been told in general terms that the founder's daughter held controlling interest through a private trust. He had been told this, and he had looked at the quiet woman at his son's side at every family dinner, and had simply never connected the two. The pieces connected now, too late. "That is not possible," Caden said. Oriana walked past him without hurrying. She did not look at Fleur's neck, where the compass still hung on its chain. At the boardroom door, she turned. "Caden," she said, "bring Fleur." His expression tightened. "Why?" Oriana's eyes moved to the compass. "She's wearing company history," she said. "She should hear what it cost." The boardroom table held 12 chairs. Oriana took the one at the head. For 6 years, Caden had watched her sit quietly at the far end of every table, at dinners, at company events, at a holiday party where Rutger had made a toast that did not include her name. She had sat at the far end and kept her expression neutral and carried everything that was hers without showing a single card. Now she took the chair, and every board member remained standing until she sat. Maeve Holst, 59, Kessler and Tide's lead independent board member, said, "The board recognizes Ms. Kessler's authority." Aldwin confirmed the trust documentation. Vance connected his laptop to the screen. The Kessler Ridge Trust structure appeared. Oriana's full legal name at the top, the controlling shares beneath it, the reserved powers, the board authority. Caden stared at the screen, then he looked at Oriana. "You lied to me." Oriana's expression did not change. "No," she said. "I waited to see who you were when you believed I had nothing." The words settled over the room slowly. Caden opened his mouth. Nothing came. Vance began the evidence presentation. Ansel & Co. had received preferred vendor status on 4 Kessler and Tide renovation projects without a competitive bid process. The requests had been submitted through Rutger's operational division and coded as client relations development. Pruitt had altered 2 finance entries to obscure the source. 2 more had been hidden under a renovation credit category that the ethics board had not reviewed. Oswin, seated near the wall, said, "Preferred vendor arrangements happen every day in hospitality." Vance looked at him. "Not when the preferred vendor is financially distressed, in an undisclosed personal relationship with a company consultant, and receiving access to confidential renovation timelines outside approved channels." Fleur's posture stiffened. Sané clicked a remote. A transcript appeared on the screen, a recorded vendor call from a Kessler and Tide corporate line, where all outside vendors received the standard notification before speaking. Fleur's words appeared in black text. "Caden says he's stepping into real authority at Kessler and Tide. If that's true, the firm connected to that step needs to be positioned before the announcement. I'm not waiting another quarter." No one spoke. Floor's mask did not fall completely, but it cracked enough for the room to see what was beneath it. That was taken out of context, she said. Oriana looked at her calmly. Then you'll have time to explain the context during the investigation. Beck Solon shifted her hand toward her coat pocket. Doran Ellis, 45, Kessler & Tide's head of security, moved beside her immediately. Please keep your device visible, Miss Solon. Bex froze. Caden said, You're doing this because of last night, because I embarrassed you. Last night showed me why I could no longer protect you, Oriana said. The files show me why I could no longer protect my mother's company. Then she looked at the compass on Fleur's neck. The compass, she said. Fleur's hand went to the chain. It was given to me. Caden, I had the right to give it. For the first time in the boardroom, pain crossed Oriana's face. Brief, visible. Everyone in the room saw it. That compass was my mother's, she said. It is listed in the Kessler estate inventory. It was removed from my personal property and transferred in a public setting while you were standing under this company's crest. She looked at Caden. It was not yours to give. Sané opened a document. A property recovery notice has been prepared. Whether Miss Kessler files a formal complaint depends on cooperation. Fleur's fingers shook as she unclasped the chain. Without the compass, without Caden's manufactured authority, without the room tilting in her direction, she looked for the first time exactly like what she was, a woman who had borrowed access from someone who never had it to lend. She placed the compass on the table. Oriana did not reach for it. Not yet. She let it sit between them. Then she turned to Rutger. Director Vane, she said, let's talk about the vendor contracts you authorized under my mother's company seal. Rutger's chair scraped backward. You are turning a marital dispute into a corporate investigation. Oriana said evenly, I am turning a corporate investigation into the record it deserves. Maeve leaned forward. The screen changed to Rutger's internal communications. A note entered into the company's operations system after a private meeting with Caden 6 months ago. Oriana's presence at investor-facing events creates friction. Minimize her involvement in external-facing programs going forward. He had written it in a system owned by the company, whose controlling shareholder was the woman he had written it about. Caden looked at his father. Rutger would not meet his eyes. Vance opened a final file, Operational Authority Restructure Proposal. Phase 2, remove trust-level oversight requirement from preferred vendor approval process. The room tightened. Even Fleur stopped breathing audibly. Sand placed the document in front of Rutger. 3 months ago, Director Vane supported a proposal to reduce board review over preferred vendor access. On paper, an efficiency measure. In practice, a mechanism to remove Kessler Ridge Trust oversight from the exact category of decisions being exploited by Ansel & Co. Rutger stood. The trust slows down legitimate operations. The trust, Oriana said, was my mother's final safeguard. The words stopped him completely. He looked at her, really looked, perhaps for the first time since Caden had brought her home, and what moved across his face was not remorse. It was recognition, the kind that arrives too late to mat, but too clearly to ignore. He had been eating at a table paid for by dividends from her company. He had dismissed her at every dinner in a house those dividends helped fund. He had written memos to minimize her visibility inside a building her mother had built. Oriana did not let the silence hold long. She picked up the resolution folder. As controlling owner of Kessler & Tide Hotels and acting chairwoman under Kessler Ridge Trust Authority, I am issuing the following actions pending full legal review. She read each line without pausing. Rutger Vane, suspended from his position as Executive Director of Operations pending full investigation into unauthorized vendor approvals, governance interference, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and misuse of company authority. Pruitt Colm, placed on administrative leave, removed from all financial systems, pending review of altered internal records. Ansel & Co., all pending access requests, preferred contracts, and vendor discussions frozen until legal review is complete. Caden Vane's consulting contract, visitor access, executive sponsorship, and all company permissions revoked. Tora Vane, removed from event committee access and guest list authority for all Kessler & Tide properties. Bex Solon's devices and recordings preserved for legal review. Oswin Ansel, barred from all Kessler & Tide facilities pending investigation. Each consequence fell cleanly. No raised voice, no drama. Just one woman reading from a page in a room that had spent 6 years believing she had nothing to say. Fleur stepped forward. You cannot do this to me. Oriana looked at her without anger. I didn't, she said. You did it to yourself when you mistook borrowed influence for real access. Floor's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Security moved toward Rutger first. Doran reached for his access badge. Rutger stiffened. I ran these operations for 11 years. You operated them, Oriana said. Doran removed the badge and held it to the scanner. The light blinked red. Rutger stared at it. The man who had walked Kessler and Tide's corridors like he owned the air could no longer open the door. Outside the boardroom, the video was already circulating. Not released by Oriana. Not by her team. Bex Solon had sent the gala footage to Entertainment Contacts the night before. Caden at the microphone, the compass in his hand, Oriana's face when she stepped forward. Bex had sent it believing it would be a story about a wife who lost badly in public. By the time the boardroom session ended, every hospitality industry contact in the region had seen the clip and the company's statement side by side. Kessler and Tide Hotels has suspended certain executives and frozen specific third-party access pending investigation into governance violations, financial irregularities, and misuse of corporate resources. The comment sections called Caden reckless. They called him small. They said he had handed a founder's heirloom to a Smiths instead, a company that didn't belong to him. They said he hadn't just lost his wife. He had exposed himself. Inside the building, Huxley Dawn stood near the lobby screens and watched Oriana's name appear in the statement. He read it twice, then he removed his cap. Her mother would have wanted this, he said to Paz, who was standing beside him. What do you mean? Paz asked. Huxley looked at the words, Oriana Mara Kessler, controlling owner, and said, that woman never missed the morning remembrance. Not once in 11 years. He paused. That's how you know who built something and who just managed it. In the private corridor outside the conference room, Caden found Oriana alone. He had lost his access badge. His consulting contract had been terminated. Tora had stopped answering his calls. Fleur had not spoken to him since Oswin shouted at her in the hallway. You said he had real authority. You said the wife was nobody, before security had asked them both to lower their voices. Oriana, he said, please. She stopped. She did not move closer. I made a mistake. You planned it, she said. For months, the compass, the speech, the stage, you planned what it would look like. His eyes filled. I thought you were holding yourself back from me. I thought there was something you were keeping that you didn't trust me with. There was, she said. I was waiting to find out if you would honor me when you believed honor was all I had to offer. He looked down. There was no answer. There had never been one waiting for him. Sani stepped forward with a folder. Divorce filing, she said to Caden. Kessler and Tide assets are held through a family trust, predating the marriage and are fully shielded. Personal claims will be handled through legal counsel. He took the folder without looking at it. Oriana looked at him one final time, not with hatred, with something closer to exhaustion, and beneath that the particular grief that does not come from losing what you should have kept. It comes from seeing clearly, finally, what was never really there. Did you ever love me? He asked. Yes, she said, that is why you lasted as long as you did. She walked away. 3 weeks later, Oriana sat in the boardroom again. The morning light came through the windows and spread across the polished table like water, with nowhere urgent to be. There was no fear in the room, no urgency. The board stood when she entered. She nodded and took the chair. She opened the first item on the agenda. A memorial scholarship, funded from the savings recovered after the frozen Ansel & Co. Arrangements were audited and the excess payments clawed back for the children of Kessler and Tide hospitality workers, named for Mara Kessler. An expanded ethics protocol requiring disclosure of personal relationships for all vendor approvals involving company officers or their family members. A formal reinstatement of the annual morning remembrance at every Kessler and Tide property, with the observation listed as a protected company tradition in the employee handbook. Maeve Holst was the first to begin clapping. Vance followed, Aldwin, Sané from the side of the room, the board. The sound built slowly and moved toward the hallway, where Paz and 2 other junior employees had gathered near the door, not quite in the room, but close enough to hear. Oriana lowered her eyes for a moment. She was not sentimental about it. She was clear. That afternoon, she walked to the heritage alcove at the original Kessler and Tide property. The canvas cloth was gone. Mara Kessler looked out from the portrait in a dark coat, her chin lifted, the Shenandoah Valley Ridge visible in the window behind her. The nameplate below the frame read, Mara Kessler, founder, Kessler and Tide Hotel. Beside the portrait was a small glass display case. Inside it rested the bronze compass, cleaned, polished, the engraving visible under the light, True North. MK, a small card beside it read, Carried by Mara Kessler at every Kessler & Proptening 1995-29, returned to company history by Oriana Mara Kessler. Rosette Hain came and stood beside her. She would want you to carry it again someday, Rosette said softly. Oriana looked at the compass for a long time. Maybe someday, she said. But not yet. Not as proof that someone chose me. She looked at her mother's portrait, as proof that I chose myself. Outside, the November wind moved through the valley. Huxley Dawn was walking the east corridor below, doing his morning rounds the way he had done them since before Oriana could read the engraving on the compass herself. Paz was at the front desk, checking in the first guests of the day. The building was alive around her, warm and working and still standing, the way things stand that were built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Caden had thought he was giving away a compass. Rutger had thought he was managing an empire. Fleur had thought she was receiving something that could be given. None of them had understood what Oriana already knew, and what her mother had known before her, that what a woman builds in silence does not disappear when someone mistakes that silence for permission. It waits. And when she is ready, it opens every door. Subscribe for more stories like this one, and comment True North if you believe that real strength never needs a stage, it only needs the right moment.